Hi everybody. For this video, we're going to look at functions as graphs, and what we're going to do is use Desmos to do that. So what I've done here is I've brought up a browser window, so if you want to play along at home, I would encourage you to do that. You can do that by going to desmos.com. So this is the browser version of Desmos. So if we click that, what you'll see is this web page, and so at the top it says Desmos is beautiful free math. So this is a graphing calculator. It does a lot of stuff, just like your TI-84 calculator, but it does a whole lot more than that, and it's free. So we're going to use it a lot this semester. If you have internet access, using your browser window is going to be totally fine. If you don't, though, which sometimes we don't have Wi-Fi in certain places, you can download an app to your tablet or smartphone, and you can use that. You can log in, you can create a user account with Desmos, and all your work will be saved, and you'll be able to have it offline on your smartphone. So I would also encourage you to do that. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to click Start Graphing. This is our window. So what we saw before in our previous videos, we had a function as a table, and what I'm going to do is show you how to add that table into Desmos. So this big plus sign over here on the left, if you click on it, then just click on table, what you'll see is something that looks like this. And Desmos uses X's for our inputs, and it's going to use Y's for our outputs. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to recreate our function, or this one's going to be the not function from our previous video. So we had this input output pair. We had 0 input with a 0 output, and then we had a 1 input with 2, and we had 3, and our output was pi. So I'm just going to type into my keyboard the letters pi, and I get this output of pi. Then we had 4, input of 4 and output of 5, and then we went one more. We said we had an input of 1 and an output of 3. So if I come over here, if I look on the right, so if I look over here at these points right here, so if you see where the swirling red dot is, what's happening is it's plotting all of these points as input-output pairs. So it's looking at XY pairs, and it's figuring out what my X coordinate is along the X axis, so this axis down here. And it's figuring out where the output is. So when I had an input of 0, I also had an output of 0, so I got that point there. I had an input of 1, so 1 was right here, and then it pairs that up and says it had an output of 2. So we get this thing going on. So Desmos is plotting all of our input-output pairs on this graph, and what it uses is the horizontal axis is our X, which is our input, and the vertical axis is our Y, which is our output. And so we can see here that well, all of the information that I put in my table is there, and by clicking these green dots on or off, so if you see the green dots next to the Y, I can turn those off, or I can turn them back on, and those will turn my data on or off in Desmos. Okay, so what we see with this thing is not a function. We said we have the same input, so we have the input of 1 associated with 2 different outputs. Now if I go to my graph, what we're going to do is we see that this vertical line right here actually has 2 different points that go through it. So what that's telling me is I drew this vertical line, and I have 2 outputs that are associated with the same input. And as we said in the last video, that's not desirable. So when we look at this graphically, what we're doing is we're seeing that these vertical lines are giving me some information about whether or not I have a function. And so what we do is we call this the vertical line test. So if I look at the graph of a function, or if I look at my data visually in the XY plane, I can use what's called the vertical line test to determine if I have a function. And so what I do is I draw I ask myself, can I find a vertical line? So I sort of move a vertical line around, and I say, well, is there any point at which a vertical line will intersect my data or my graph at more than one point? And if it does, if I can find that, then I don't have a function because there is some input that will give you more than one output. So let's play around with Desmos a little bit and see if we can explore functions some more. So let's turn this off. And in our in-class worksheets, what we had was we had this cool looking graph, y squared equals x cubed plus 7. So I picked this one because it's actually well known. So this is used in Bitcoin. So this is called an elliptic curve. And at least at one point, I don't know if they use it anymore, but at one point this was the elliptic curve that they used in a process in Bitcoin. So it was on my mind, and we can play with it here. So if we look, here's our x's and y's. And the question I have is, oh, is this a function? So we'll pause here for a second and let us think about it. So if I come back over here and I think about the vertical line test, all right, so we're going to think about this vertical line test. Can I draw a vertical line somewhere that hits this graph in more than one point? And if we think about it, we say, well, if I just look at 0, if I draw this vertical line right here, that would correspond to an input of 0. We see that we have an output here, and we have an output here. So an input of 0 corresponds to more than one output. So this graph is not a function. It's still useful. As we said, it's used in Bitcoin, but it's not a function, right? So you can see over here, an input of 3 would have more than one output. And in fact, there are lots of ways we have lots of inputs that correspond to more than one output. So this is not a function. However, if I change this just slightly, so maybe I don't have y squared, maybe I just say, let's look at y equals x cubed plus 7. So we'll turn this part off. We can see that, right? So this, let's see if we can get rid of our axes here. So if we just play around with this, we see that, oh, here's my graph of y equals x cubed plus 7. And if I check around, it seems like no matter where I draw a vertical line, I'm not going to ever hit that graph in more than one point. And so what we would say is this passes the vertical line test, and y equals x cubed plus 7 is a function. So if you have an input, whatever it is, there's going to be exactly one output that goes along with it. All right. So thanks for watching, and in our next video, what we're going to do is look at how we can use notation to represent functions and maybe describe what a function is doing using our words. See you then.